James Joyce's radical and revolutionary novels broke down the barriers between autobiography and fiction. He wanted them to be read by everyone. But for many, they were impenetrable. In 1904, James Joyce and his lover, Nora Barnacle, left Ireland to live in self-imposed exile in Trieste, Italy, on the Adriatic Sea.
For Joyce, Dublin was always Dublin 1904. The clock stopped. That meant that he had stable material with which to work as an artist. He wasn't in the middle of it, watching the buildings being pulled down and rebuilt, seeing new relationships springing up, being dragged out to the pub by his cronies to tell stories. No. He was the isolated exile.
Joyce rejected his own country and its repressive religion. He was for the rest of his life to revolutionise the making of the novel by his shocking portrayal of the city of his youth, Dublin, and its Irish citizens.
And he always made it clear that as far as he was concerned, everything was fair game. There was nothing that could not be written down.
He saw himself as a sinner. And he definitely saw himself on the side of the devil. And he knew there was this sort of obscene side to him and a sort of bestial side to him. But that was all part of his artistic programme.
Joyce wrote some of the most explosive and scandalous prose the world had ever seen. But his notorious self-obsessed lifestyle, a daily cocktail of drink-fueled hedonism, would bring him to the brink of death and despair.
It would be spiritual death, he used to say. It would be spiritual death for me not to follow my inclinations, and that applied to alcohol as much as possibly other women.
He sought to destroy relationships with both family and friends.
Great selfishness, great egoism, and Joyce constantly worried about himself. Everything served his writing, and his family paid a heavy price, undoubtedly, for that.
He was dangerous to friends and lovers alike.
I think Joyce's idea of women is a very troubled one, and very damaged perhaps by the kind of things that Irish Catholicism, the rigid Irish Catholicism that he has been brought up into, has done to him. He has this idea of women as either virgin or whore, and there seems to be no happy medium.
Joyce was a remarkable observer and diarist, but his comic mimicry and satirical acid wit made many enemies and lost powerful potential allies.
And stew laid it into you, his belly told him, and so on. And really what the prose is saying is, you're a pig.
He exploited his family and was unfaithful to the one great love of his life.
It used to infuriate him that she would talk about him in the same breath as the other men she'd known, because he prided himself on being unique.
In an act of betrayal that provided a guilty thread that ran through his life, he refused his mother's final wish to take Holy Communion before she died.
I think he was terribly selfish, terribly obsessed with his own writing. He could only have written had he been so obsessed with his own writing, so that's understandable. But I think there is a basic lack of respect for so many of the people close to him in so many of the things that he did in his life, that is in a way almost to be condemned.
Joyce had one of the most powerful minds of the 20th century.
Maybe Joyce couldn't be controlled by the forces of orthodoxy and the people that want to hold everything back and make everything easy for mass consumption.
For many, Joyce was a deeply despicable man. His extraordinary ability to describe the raw nature of the human condition angered both family and friends.
The reason Joyce is so controversial, or was in his lifetime, is because he had the courage to mention the unmentionable. Someone described Ulysses as like a bomb going off in the prison of English literature.
He had a scene in a lavatory. It was a favourite haunt of his. But described, again, the everyday things of the smells and sounds of going to the lavatory. That was then not done. Deeply, deeply shocking.
Joyce today remains highly controversial. Some of his most erotic love letters cannot be either read or published. They are still considered obscene.
Reading the new dirty letter, which was just sold at Sotheby's. Yeah, this stuff is filthy by international eternal standards, and it's always going to offend people.
But this was not a life that Joyce had planned for himself. From an early age, he was convinced of his greatness and ability to become an Irish free-thinking literary genius. James Joyce's great novels were based on his early life in the city of Dublin, in which he grew up. Joyce was born in a wealthy Dublin suburb on the 2nd of February 1882. He was the eldest of 10 children.
His father, John Joyce, came from a solid middle-class family. He was from Cork and he inherited 11 properties in Cork, plus £1,000 on his 21st birthday. So he was a very, very wealthy man.
James was definitely John Joyce's favourite son, and he used to call him Baby Tucku originally, and then he later christened him Sunny Jim because he had a very sunny disposition. And Joyce grew up really with this awareness that he was the favoured child.
In September 1888, James was sent by his father to Clongowes College, Ireland's most prestigious Catholic Jesuit school.
He came away to school here at the extraordinarily early age of 6½. James Joyce quite clearly was a very bright little boy. He had the benefit of the best education, and he was really the only one who had a full education.
James's future was to be educated to join Ireland's ruling elite. It's from Joyce's early years in Ireland that his explosive autobiographical stories are drawn.
We have recorded in the early chapters of A Portrait of the Artist the atmosphere of Clongowes Wood, which is a school for young Catholic gentry. Pick, pock, pack, pock, like drops of water falling faintly in a brimming bowl. The sounds of cricket, which is not an Irish sound. It's not Hurley. It's not the smack of the slither and the come on in Hurley. It's the sound of the prototypes of the British Raj.
But it must have been very daunting. Country boarding school, the rough and tumble of it. He would have been away from home and homesick. And he certainly reflects homesickness in his autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist, as a young man.
The Jesuit Christian brothers soon recognised James as an exceptional student. He was known as the boy with the blotting paper memory. In his novel, The Portrait of the Artist as a young man, Joyce gives the impression that his life at Clongowes was one of conspiracy and betrayal. Once this was true.
It's one of the big episodes in the first chapter of A Portrait of the Artist. It recalls an incident in Joyce's own life which probably took place in the course of his first year.
James's glasses were smashed in a bicycle collision with another pupil.
And now he's in class, and the Dean and Prefect of Studies, or headmaster, Father James Daly, he notices little James Joyce sitting there not writing like the others. And so Father Daly demands to know why he's not writing.
James was unable to see to do his classwork.
James begins to give an explanation about the glasses, and of course he's immediately disbelieved. This is a schoolboy story. "A schemer, I see it in your eyes," Father Daly says.
James never forgot this nightmare journey of injustice. The terror and pain as he was led along the school corridors, up the stairs to the headmaster, and being beaten by the pandybat, a leather and bone strap.
He gives them one stroke on each hand. In A Portrait of the Artist, he has himself, as Stephen, remembering afterwards that he was only ever punished once by the Jesuits in all his time at school with them, and that had been in the wrong.
So a demonstration of his constant lifelong fear and feeling that he was being betrayed, that he had this righteous indignation, that he was in fact superior, and how could anyone see him as doing anything other than wonderful?
James was scarred and outraged by this injustice, but there is clear evidence that on more than one occasion he was punished at school.
We've discovered, only in the last 20 years, we've discovered a punishment book which records incidents when boys were sent out for punishment. And Joyce's name appears 3 times in a very imperfectly kept record. So I think we can speculate that he almost certainly would have appeared more often if we had the pages. He got 4 strokes for vulgar language in March 1889. And of course, he was the great exponent of all the vulgarities of language in his writing in later life.
After just 2 years, aged 9, James's privileged school days at Clongowes were suddenly shattered by the collapse of his father's fortunes.
The father drank them literally right into the gutter. So by the time Joyce was a school-going age, he was experiencing two sets of circumstances simultaneously. A wealthy, gentle background, schooling appropriate to that kind of background, and also beginning to experience the life of the urban poor.
I think that made Joyce a fighter. He had a strong sense that life was a battle, and it was almost a duty to fight and come out on top.
Joyce's father was no longer able to pay the expensive school fees, so he was withdrawn from Clongowes. But his superior intellect was recognised and he was given a free place by the Jesuits at Dublin's Belvedere College.
He must have been quite angry with father for the family's demise, for his treatment of his mother, which often became abusive, increasingly so, and it must have been very difficult to him to watch his hero decline.
At home, all was in chaos. The safe middle-class lifestyle was ruined by his father's spendthrift habits, which Joyce would himself later inherit. Only 14, whilst still at school, Joyce began to prowl the streets of Dublin's dark underworld, a world of pimps and prostitutes, rich in sounds of drunken revelry, life's underbelly, later to be portrayed in The Dubliners.
Where they were living, of course, was adjacent to the red light brothel district of Dublin. He has found his way into that territory, and he's met prostitutes.
And these were the after-school trips to the night town, the brothel district of Dublin. It was actually called Monto, but he called it Night Town in his books. And it was there that he, I think, prowled the streets late at night, really, looking for love, but in the main, I think he just found sex.
Aged 14 and a Catholic, he was riddled with guilt.
Joyce's own sexuality was what brought him, first of all, into conflict with the church, because he was a very devoted servant of the church.
But Joyce was now torn between heaven or hell.
And he has a terrible crisis. In the novel, he depicts almost a nervous breakdown. I suspect that's very much what it felt like. And he goes to confession, and he vomits it all out, and he vows reform. And there's a period of reform then that runs through that year, and perhaps for a bit longer into his final year.
It was a kind of Jekyll and Hyde period in his life, and he did experience a brief resurgence of religious feeling, but it didn't last long, and I think the Monto district won in the end.
One of the things that marks out A Portrait of the Artist as quite different to other books is not just its treatment of the poverty and betrayals of childhood. With Joyce, he maintains his realism. He has dirty photographs of naked women, which he hides up in the sooty chimney and pulls out. And afterwards he's revolted by his excess and he makes all his confessions and so on. And there's this constant equivocation between, on the one hand, the sexual urge and then the voices of the church telling him that he would, this is wrong and he'll go to hell and so on.
He would have found it extremely hard to humble himself and say, I have sinned, I was wrong, I need grace. This is all the religious impulse. So there's a real division to be made between his early years in Belvedere, model student, model in every way, and then the latter years when, although on the surface he's publicly highly regarded, he's actually moving into a very rebellious stance.
In 1898, Joyce was 16 and had enrolled at University College, Dublin. He was convinced of his exceptional abilities and genius. He had rebelled against the Catholic Church and the establishment. Now he had discovered one of history's epic heroes to identify with. Ulysses, a brave man struggling with adversity. In 1898, James Joyce's home life was full of constant upheaval, chaos, violence and uncertainty.